relations, marketing, and social media and healthcare requires making the right moves at the right time. Welcome to the Overrated and Underused show. Here's your hosts, experienced marketers Jen Jennings and Tom Testa, with special guest Adrian Stoner. Overrated and underused. The Overrated and Underused show.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Overrated and Underused. And Jen, Adrian, and I have got a great show lined up for you all today as we're going to talk about influencers. And Jen, let's get this right out of the way from the start.
What you got for me?
Well, we know that I'm a pretty big deal in the space. So
You're a huge deal.
Let me say this, Jennifer. You know, with me and my 50 Twitter followers, they listen when I tweet. So, I mean, if there's anyone who's going to talk about influence, it's got to be me, and I guess maybe a little bit of you too, right? You're a pretty big deal in this space.
I don't think I'd go that far, actually. But there was that one time when HIMSS was actually going to happen that I was chosen to carry a Hitmic unicorn around, and I was going to get to take photos of the unicorn and post it to social media of all the cool things that are happening at HIMSS. I'm holding out hope for 2022 for sure.
Us aside,
there's bigger names out there.
There apparently are bigger names on the influencer side of things, and we're going to dive into it today. I think it's going to be a really good show, and I think it's kind of timely because, you know, we are heading towards HIMSS, and a lot of those influencers start doing some buzzing around HIMSS, especially on social media, and also maybe a good time for the folks, some of our listeners and other marketers, to maybe try and reach out and connect with some of these influencers ahead of a show like HIMSS.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, even outside of just HIMSS, a lot of companies and healthcare marketers and, you know, even providers have looked at the ways in which, you know, in the absence of in-person events and their typical lead generation methods, what are some different strategies, like throwing out, you know, influencer marketing? It's not something that has probably been on, you know, a lot of healthcare vendors' list of part of their marketing strategy for years. But certainly, you know, I think it has been a part of marketing for, you know, a very long time, just in different facets. I think, you know, even before social media, I think there was still influencers. And I mean, you see it a lot more when we're talking about consumer brands. And, you know, when most people think of influencers, at least I, you know, immediately think of Instagram and TikTok and, you know, where there's, you know, sponsored ads and celebrity endorsements and all of those things. So, you know, we're not necessarily talking about, you know, Kim Kardashian or J-Lo or anybody like that. But, you know, I think if you're a health IT vendor, there are still people within the space that are influential to your audience of, you know, buyers, or influential to, you know, those that would kind of make purchase decisions.
And I would agree with that. But I think we really should take a step back for a second and maybe even define what is an influencer. I think everyone has their own, you know, we joked in the beginning, of course, you and I are influencers.
Yeah.
You know,
we are not influencers.
No, we are not influencers. But again, I think it's a good question in terms of what is actually an influencer, because I think it means different things to different people, who their influencers are. We know that, you know, to be an influencer, you know, you've got to be someone who is trusted, a trusted source of information, right? Folks that people can turn to. A lot of people feel influencers have either their ear to the ground to a lot of things. That's why sometimes journalists can be great influencers. You know, people in politics can be great influencers because, again, they have the ear to the ground that are movers and makers, CEOs, CIOs. So I think it depends. Again, you mentioned celebrities, and of course, there are even some possibly celebrity influencers even in the health IT space. What are your thoughts? Talking to our audience, how would you define an influencer?
You know, in this case, I would look at an influencer as a individual person, not necessarily a brand or a company. Although, I mean, you could think about it differently. But to me, you know, an influencer is a specific person that target market would listen to, would be receptive to the messages. They'd, you know, look to emulate them. It's somebody that's, you know, like if it's offering the guidance, you know, when you're talking about, you know, our experiences with influencers, we're hit with them everywhere. I mean, from advertising and even just like, you know, all of social media is, you know, you see sponsored ads and things like that. But at the same time, if it's, you know, it's ad for, hey, here's this magic pillow that's going to help you sleep, and it's the company making a post about it, versus an individual person that, hey, it's maybe a celebrity that I follow, or it's Reese Witherspoon and she's talking about this pillow. And it's like, oh, well, if Reese likes this, maybe it's worth a shot. Like, even though you know that they got paid for it, there's still something that, your mind almost gets tricked by. And so that's kind of the sponsored, the paid side of it, when we'll kind of dive deeper into it, because there are really those authentic conversations and influencers that are genuinely interested in cool things that they're seeing in the industry and out there. And so, building those conversations and making them kind of aware of those things, I think, so that they can, if they want to share them with other people, then that's kind of their choice versus paying them for a set number of ads.
Yep. Maybe even what you're getting at, and something I would say is you have to have the right influencer that you connect with. So for example, if you're a health IT vendor, getting JLo to promote your new EHR platform or telehealth solution isn't going to be the best thing for your brand. That's certainly overrated, I would think.
Yeah.
Just trying to connect with anyone who can, just because they're a name, they have to be the right name. They have to be the right influencer. I think especially when you're talking about on social media, having a celebrity probably isn't going to influence buyers, but having the right person on Twitter or LinkedIn that's in their field, connecting them to the right social influencers is going to be huge for your brand and your bottom line. But again, it's finding those influencers.
Right. It's very different within our, B2B space, and especially within healthcare versus, a consumer type product. I think definitely when you're looking at a influencer marketing program, one that's within a B2B environment and, especially healthcare is going to be very different than, a consumer audience. I think is certainly still valid. I do think it's underused aspect is, the whole idea of, reaching out and kind of finding those kind of well-respected niche influencers. And even just influencer engagement, we're not necessarily talking about the paid spokespeople and those paid opportunities. Like you'll talk about my platform or my product 4 times and 4 posts, and you're kind of feeding them the content and as a paid service. So I mean that's certainly out there, and that is a thing. Trying to start authentic conversations with those healthcare influencers, and it's not for everybody, but it takes a lot of work. It's not a plug and play type thing. It's really understanding the space that you're in, understanding who's talking about, certain topics and who is talking about topics that your target market cares about. So even if they're not necessarily talking about what you want to talk about, but they are talking about other things that, if your audience is CIOs, then, if they're a CIO, they talk about a wide range of topics that CIOs care about. It's still something that's kind of like their worthwhile influencer to kind of go after and talk about your perspective or, different legislative or regulatory, items.
I think bottom line, this kind of organic influencer engagement, it's underused.
Underused.
And it's underused because from, what you just got done talking about is it's something that doesn't happen overnight. Something that's paid, it's just that, hey, I'm going to pay for something. I can, engage with that influencer, whatever their, the terms of the deal are. And most likely I'm going to see some instant gratification soon. I'm going to see that tweet about my brand. I'm going to see what have you, a LinkedIn post about my organization or my new product. But with this organic approach, it's like anything. I mean, we've talked about it. I feel there's a lot of relationship building behind the scenes, because if an influencer and there's Jen Jennings and she's trying to tweet at me or DMing me about this new product, I'm not instantly going to say, oh, okay. Well, first of all, let's back up. I probably got 10,000 other DMs. It's like trying to pitch the New York Times. Okay, get in line because their inbox is full of pitches, right? And I feel influencers kind of have that same where I'm getting hit. The media example, I feel like it's got to be something where you're building those relationships. And that's the tough part. How do you kind of rise above the rest of the noise that's happening out there on social media?
Yeah, social media is kind of where this is all evolved to where we see the most influencer, outreach and marketing. But I think the conversations extend even beyond social media. They could be just industry advocates for the brands. It's really just influential people that could make a difference for your company. And I think there's a lot of ways where even outside of social media, having kind of your strong marketing team, like if this is something that your company wants to really go after, there's a lot of work that goes behind it and a lot of relationship building. I mean, the influencer could be a journalist. It could be a friendly radio show host like, Tom and I, or, podcasters or freelance writers or anybody that may want to build a relationship with so that, you can be featured more prominently or, analyst or an industry association board or task force or something that's really relevant to your audience, or a technology partner. I mean, I think it can go on and on. I mean, there's, HHS and ONC and, all of those type of people that really have unique perspectives. But I think when we're talking about building relationships and like you said, like their inboxes are flooded, a lot of them are smart. They get 1,000 messages. You've got to cut through the BS and be authentic, and you have to influence the influencer. They've got to believe in what you're saying. Otherwise, they're not going to authentically talk about it to anybody else, unless you're paid. If it's a paid situation, then, they don't necessarily have to completely believe in it. They can just believe in the check that they're cashing.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Overrated and Underused on Healthcare Now Radio. Today's episode is all about the influencers. And Jennifer, one thing that I think would be great for our listeners is maybe, we talked a little bit about what makes an influencer and, what kind of your message has to be genuine. Don't be promotional, because these folks don't want to look like they're endorsing your products or things like that. But maybe we talk about a couple of ways that folks can connect with these influencers. It's all about, hey, talk to them about how can they do it? Well, that's a great question. One way is, again, engaging with them on social. I think that might sound obvious to anyone here, but it's not. So let's just talk about the stuff we do at the agency level. There'll be times where a reporter, might finish up a great article with one of our experts, one of our clients. And after it's published, it's certainly something common where I would say something like, hey, thanks at reply, reporter A, B, or C. Thanks so much for a great interview with client X. Thanks again for, something to that effect. Really just reaching out to them to say it was a great piece and our client really enjoyed the discussion. And oftentimes we'll get some engagement through that. And I think things like that is a good way to get some engagement. And again, it's that slow buildup, because even just one, retweet from that reporter or a thanks, it was a great conversation, isn't going to boost things, but it's a good start.
Yeah, I mean, definitely is about relationship building and also a matter of understanding kind of the space that you're in and understanding the discussions around, your messaging or what you're trying to kind of promote or spread awareness of. But yeah, I mean, definitely commenting on their post, engaging. Really, I think, likes are great. Everybody loves likes, everybody likes retweets, but having meaningful conversations, I think, is underused.
Underused.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think likes, they're overrated.
Overrated.
Seriously, I think that's one aspect that's just overrated. And I just had to come out and say that and hijack your statement by saying how overrated likes are.
Yeah. Back to the show.
I would say that another way you can engage is, how about inviting these influencers to do things like join your podcast? Because here's why. These influencers also like to promote. They also are big into the, field of self-promotion a little bit. Not that that's a negative thing, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a reason that, they've worked on building a following, because, you just don't get a robust following of 20,000, 50,000 followers overnight. It's something that you're constantly putting the work into. You're putting content out, like, not to say that the reason is to build a following, but the reason may just be to spread awareness or, to talk about these issues that are important to you or, whatever it is. So whatever they've made their platform on, they're putting their time and effort into this for a reason. So yeah, I think certainly, finding the ways that which you can align with them, align with, the things that they care about. When we're talking about influencer marketing, I think an important first step is defining who your influencers are, because, company A and company B, maybe they could be in the same space, but maybe they, their audiences are fairly different, or maybe they have, different key messages that they want to hone in on. So it's really defining who you would consider an influencer, who is gonna make a difference to your marketing.
Jen, I feel like we focus a lot on social, and social is a big part because I think everyone thinks influencers, social media, right? If I can just get that one tweet from someone. But that's why I threw out the example of the podcast. What I'm trying to get is there are other ways to connect with influencers. You could have them, again, appear on your podcast. You could have them as a guest blogger. You could have them, are you throwing a conference or having a webinar? Maybe you can have them be part of that event. So there are plenty of ways. Again, I feel like we were maybe a little too focused on social, but it certainly goes way beyond social media in terms of connecting with these influencers and having others see that you're connecting with them. So it doesn't have to just be on social media.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think there's lots of ways, but it's kind of the same thing that we've talked about on social for years. And it's, some people do it well and some people don't. It's mostly because it's not a plug and play type of marketing tactic. It's something that has to happen organically. The conversations are very real time, whether it's on social or beyond. I think it's just, you've got to be ingrained in that industry. And so it's not something that you kind of have your entry-level marketing person kind of do. It's somebody that has to be at your company, a very knowledgeable expert in, what they're doing, or, somebody at an agency that really understands your company, your messaging and the market, and can kind of hone in on those and figure out the conversations. So influencer marketing really isn't something that I would recommend for every company. It's not for everybody, but I think it can be very useful when in the right hands. So I have faith in a lot of the companies out there. I encourage you to look into it and try your hand.
And there's various levels of it too, Jen, I think that we've kind of tried to hint at. You don't have to be 100% all in on influencer marketing, influencer campaigns, because again, I think some folks are already doing it through like media relations or general social media. There's just kind of that next level up, so to speak, if you want. And like you said, a lot of folks may not have the time to dedicate a complete, initiative to influencer building or influencer campaign, but I think everyone's doing it well in some form. And again, I think we all agree that it should be at least some part of your marketing initiative.
Clinicians Corner.
For our clinician audience, when we're talking, more providers, small practices versus, healthcare vendors or larger organizations, I think a lot of influencer marketing is probably more about working to become an influencer in your space more than it is, connecting with others. Obviously, it's, you can research top influencers, other, doctors in your profession that's putting, information out there, have large followings, but wouldn't necessarily copy, but always good to emulate and take notes from, others that are doing it well or have, strong, compelling opinions on clinical issues or, whatever you think your voice or specialty might care about. I think there's some great creative ways to get that out there.
There's a real opportunity here, I think, for providers at the local level, maybe not so much the national level, but in your own market. You have your own kind of group of followers within your own community. And I think there's an opportunity here to become an influencer in your space. If you're a chiropractor, if you're an ophthalmologist in the local area, I think there's a way to actually, like you said, put forth some expertise, some thought leadership, be an influencer in your space within your local market. Because there's probably not a lot of folks you're competing with at that level. There's probably a handful of others who are talking about some of the things you're talking about. But at the clinician level, at the local level, being someone who can be on social media, potentially sharing tips for flu season, if you're a local physician, or sharing things about your new book, like things like that. So I think there's some really good opportunities there for these clinicians to grab. And again, I know over and over again, we talk about this, and I know I'm always harping on the press side of things, but that's a way to be an influencer as well, is to try and seek out those media opportunities in your local press. Have people start to read about you because you're talking about some of the big topics that mean a lot to the folks in your community. And I think that's a great way for someone to become an influencer.
Certainly all the years of medical school, many providers didn't seek out to say, well, at the end of all this, I hope I become, an influencer on social media or beyond. But I think it is kind of just the byproduct of putting trusted information out there, getting the right information in the hands of prospective patients, and just bringing awareness to different issues or causes that you may have. So I think, obviously now with social media and everything, there's a lot of information out there, especially in local communities. It could be getting basic information that, certainly patients know if they're coming to your office regularly, but there's a lot of people out there that they don't know what they don't know. So, and I certainly would trust something that Dr. Canary wrote about versus Joe with his Simpsons, profile picture,
Avatar,
whatever it is from his,
right.
his mom's basement. I don't know. So it's whether they're saying the same thing, I would believe the credentials from a doctor more. So
One more thing I wanted to bring up here, and I feel like that line of influencer and thought leader, like, where does one become the other? Or, I kind of feel like, because we talked about, in media doing the whole, getting interviews or publishing stuff or your book, it's like a lot of that stuff is also thought leadership stuff. But do you maybe become a thought leader first, and then, you're kind of like sharing those thoughts, you're sharing your expertise, and then you become an influencer over time? I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about as we've been talking through this segment.
chicken or the egg dilemma.
Yeah. Do I want to be a thought leader or do I want to be an influencer? I think they can both happen at this clinician level. Maybe it's first, like I said, you're a thought leader, and then you kind of blossom into an influencer. It's something that kind of projects a little bit bigger. I don't know.
Yeah. And I do think, like I said before, you don't build a huge following overnight. So I do think it is a matter of putting the content out there and the audience being receptive to it and building that following. But yeah, everybody has their kind of different levels of what is an influencer. Because I may call somebody that has 10,000 followers an influencer, but certainly somebody else that has 1 million may not.
Very true. I don't think that's the case. Give me 1 million followers and I'm going to dub myself an influencer. I'll tell you that much. I want the 1M right next to my name.
You've got to do something a lot more impressive than this radio show if you want 1 million followers.
Inbox with Adrian.
All right. Well, now it is time for my favorite segment, and I think everybody's favorite segment, Inbox with Adrian.
Welcome, Adrian.
Thanks for having me again. So on this episode, you all talked very heavily about social media and, influencers and what they bring to the table as far as social media goes and healthcare. So I just wanted to point out a few people that I love to follow, and I think someone that you all should keep your eyes out for and see if what their messaging is something that you can relate to.
So basically what you're doing this episode is we don't have a question. You're just going to name drop a bunch of people that you would call influencers and that we should check out.
Yeah. Let me just talk to you about 3 of my top favorites. So let's start off with Amy Compton Phillips. She is Chief Clinical Officer of Providence Health. So for me, I have been following along with her throughout COVID. She has always just had great information about things that, mental health, the vaccination, where we are now, where we were in the beginning. She has just brought so much attention to this and awareness, and I just have always felt like I could depend on her information. If this sounds like something you're interested in, you can follow her at Amy Lee CP3. So that's AMYLEE C as in cat P3.
So we should also mention that we're not sponsored by any of these people. So
all right. So next up on my hot number 3 list is Mickey Tripathi. He is the national coordinator at ONC. So he has all the things to bring to the table.
Yeah. And Mickey, Mickey, like I know him personally, right? Mr. Tripathi. Yeah, he was appointed this year, the new head of ONC, headlines oversees the health information technology side. Mr. Tripathi, like you said, Adrian, he's a good one to follow because now that he's in this new position, I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say. And, he took over kind of the end of COVID, so to speak, maybe. So I think we'll be hearing a lot more from him and maybe seeing him more, I'm sure, at a lot of events too, going forward. but he's a great influencer on social.
Yeah, he's definitely a rising star, but one that you should not miss out on. So if you want to follow Mickey, or Mr. Tripathi, as Tom calls him.
No, Tom calls him Mickey on the golf course.
That's right, on the golf course, but professionally. So Mickey Tripathi, MICKYTRIPATHI, the number 1. That's his Twitter handle.
That's a good one.
Last but most certainly not least is Kevin at Kevin MD. So KEVINMD. So he talks all the things healthcare that you can imagine. And he is just a wonderful resource from health IT to physician management. Kevin also has a podcast that I thoroughly enjoy listening to. It is called The Podcast by Kevin MD, and I highly recommend that as well.
Kevin MD, definitely a well-known influencer, has been for a number of years. Huge, robust following. Wow. So yeah, no, I think that's a great one.
Yeah. And the bonus with him is he's got a really popular blog too. I mean, he's a hit with providers. And if you are a provider, he's a great blog to try and get published on, and trying to get into him as an influencer may even be through his blog, and then make your way over to social with him that way. So, but he's great on both aspects.
Definitely.
That's a great one.
Yeah. I think that's all we have for today. Thanks to all of our listeners for joining us. We are sponsored by Anderson Interactive and can be heard weekdays at 10 a.m., 6 p.m., and 2 a.m. Eastern on Healthcare Now Radio. You can email your Inbox with Adrian questions to hello@andersoni, that's the letter I.com, or tweet us at Jen_Jennings, Tom_Testa, or Adrian_Stoner. You can also join in the conversation at #OverUnderRadio.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Overrated and Underused Show with your hosts, experienced marketers Jen Jennings and Tom Testa, and special guest, Adrian Stoner.